I already know this. They fit the screener criteria, but are we sure they're qualified? What is the business impact of this study? If you're a researcher or a person who does research, you've most likely heard a statement or question like this made about your work. And if I had to guess, I'd say you've heard it more than once. As a researcher and operations leader, I've heard these statements and questions made about my work and the work of the researchers my team and I partner with. I've heard it throughout my career at every company I've worked for and in every role I've had, from a junior researcher to a research manager to an operations leader. And sometimes these questions are well-meaning, and it's an opportunity to evangelize research. But on far too many occasions, these questions and statements are not isolated instances from curious stakeholders. They're part of a pattern where researchers are defending the value of their work within the organization. But what if I told you it doesn't have to be like this? What if you already have all the information you need to quiet the skeptics, to be a voice for your customers, and to demonstrate the impact of research on the business? But to do this, we researchers need to speak the same language as leadership, and they speak in data. So why am I telling an audience of people who specialize in telling stories about data to speak in data? It's because we have been trying to demonstrate our impact on the business by telling stories in fragments, one project at a time. And in doing so, we've excluded ourselves from the bigger picture by missing one piece. So what's that missing piece? It's metadata. Specifically, data about your projects, not data uncovered from conducting your projects. So today, I'm going to show you a framework that leverages metadata. I'll show you a little bit about how we use this framework at AWS to connect the dots between our study insights, the ways in which we work, and the business value of research. But before I do that, let me share a story with you. So in 2018, I was in London, leading 2 stakeholders through foundational research. We were conducting in-home interviews across the city and had wrapped up for the day. We were about halfway through our 2-week trip and had a pretty good routine in place. We conduct 2 to 3 interviews per day, and on the train ride home, we debrief. And today, like all the days before, I found myself hearing stakeholders say things like, I didn't hear anything that was revolutionary, and are we sure that second participant was a fit? But instead of enduring these comments any further, I decided I was going to change the way these stakeholders spoke about research, so we could spend our time digging into what we were learning instead of me trying to convince the team about why we should be there in the first place. So for the next year, I doubled down on my investment with these stakeholders. I over-communicated. I hosted an untenable amount of brainstorming sessions with them, and I had them review every single document for any research study we were conducting with them. So fast forward a year, and we're back in London. But this time, while we were debriefing, the conversation had changed. These stakeholders were now repeating learnings back to me, sharing observations I had missed, and asking me to strategize with them. And in that moment, I realized I had done it. I had turned these naysayers into true research advocates. The blood, sweat, and tears had paid off. And then, almost immediately, it dawned on me. I had just spent an entire year investing in 2 stakeholders in one of the many categories I was supporting. So what's the elephant in the room here? What's the problem with this approach? It just doesn't scale. We can't put this kind of time and attention into every stakeholder or category. And while I hoped there would be a ripple effect for my efforts, there were other consequences to consider. Not only was it not scalable, it didn't help us secure additional, much-needed resources for the research team. And it didn't help leadership see the value in research overall. It helped this one category see the value of research for this one product. And here's the thing. This experience is not unique to me. I think as researchers, we get bogged down in that defensive pattern, in combating the naysayers, in trying to be the voice for our customers, and in trying to convince stakeholders that and leadership alike that our work matters. And we do so much in this pursuit. We host lunch and learns and send out newsletters. We conduct research at a breakneck pace, writing countless reports in countless formats, and then sending them to stakeholders, directors, and VPs, only to hear very little or nothing back at all. And it's time we break this cycle. It's time that we write a new narrative where the value of research is no longer in question. And here's how we're going to do that. We're going to leverage our metadata. We're going to leverage it to tell a story about the bigger picture of research within our organizations. And we're going to stop asking leadership to try and understand all of the insights and inner workings of our projects. And we're going to give them a higher level view, written in their language, data, so we can empower them to act on our behalf. But to do this, we have to start collecting and tracking metadata. And you may already have a tool or process in place, but just haven't leveraged the output yet. So here's where the framework is going to come in. And it doesn't matter whether you're a solo researcher, research manager, or operations teammate. Whether you conduct hundreds of studies a year or just a few, you can leverage this framework. And it starts with a blank table. So note, you can do this on paper, in Excel, or with a project management tool. At AWS, we found that having a tool helps us automate a lot of parts of the process, but please don't let that stop you. So now, on the top row, start adding project data points. Here are a few to get you started. Project name, very straightforward. Product or service, or however you refer to the area of focus that you have. Project start and project end date. How you define project start and end is ultimately up to you. My recommendation is to be consistent across projects. Methodology, this can be broad. It can be as broad as qual-quant, or you can get specific. Hard sorting, diary study, whatever makes the most sense to you. And maybe you have two columns. Spend, just like methodology, can be broad, overall project spend, or you can get specific, recruitment, incentive, that type of thing. And finally, impact. So this may start as activity-based, like hosted a readout with 3 designers and engineering teammates, or this could be specific metrics that you already have in place. Regardless, over time, this column might change, and it's probably going to become more than one column. These are just some of the data points that you can start collecting. To determine if others make sense for you and your team, I encourage you to engage your stakeholders and leadership. Ask them if they've ever been stumped answering questions or speaking about research. And in those moments, what kind of information would have been helpful to them? And also, don't be afraid to share your working list. At AWS, we initially started with a very long list based on the feedback we received, but have started to scale back. Next up, project names in the first column. So bonus points if you have a naming convention, that's great, but you certainly don't have to have one. And as you start adding in these projects, project 1, project 2, start thinking about how far back you want to go. How far back you go will ultimately be influenced by your organization. So for example, some research teams are newer and they may not have a lot of historical data. For AWS, we went back to the start of 2022. And we chose this time frame because we felt like it would help us tell the story about how the team had changed over the course of the year and how we were continuing to change. We also had several ops decisions coming up, and having a bird's eye view of the team's activity throughout the year would help us make better decisions. So now on to the fun stuff, filling in the columns. Here's the table I've completed. Each column has information for the associated project. And clearly, this is fictional data. Now you start looking for trends and information that signals where you need to dive deeper, or maybe information that can help you solve an existing problem. How about something like this? Methodology distribution. Although it looks pretty simple, it's giving us a lot of signals. So first, this tells me that the team in question here conducts more qualitative research than they do quantitative. Here are some examples of questions I might ask to get a better understanding of the why. First and foremost, why are we skewed? Is methodology type even important to us? What kind of research requests are we receiving, and who is ultimately dictating methodology? Is it the stakeholders? Is it the researchers? And how might this distribution change when we're looking at this data by service? Once I've done some digging and answered some of these questions, we can go from there. To explore what happens next, hypothetically, let's say that this team isn't conducting quantitative work because they have a tooling gap. Outsourcing the quant-related work they've been receiving is expensive, so they'll only outsource the highest priorities and keep the rest in backlog. And now that I've filled in the blanks by digging deeper, I can use that information with the metadata to make a case to the powers that be for additional budget for tooling. And instead of focusing the issue from a singular project perspective, we're pulling in metadata like demand via the number of studies in the backlog and cost of outsourced projects, so leadership can see the impact of the budget request in terms of the business. And how about something like this? The average time it takes to complete a study by methodology type. Without digging any further, there are some immediate use cases researchers, research managers can leverage. First, developing a roadmap. Second, maybe pushing back on study requests. Another, driving prioritization conversations with your stakeholders. This can also be used as an input to your capacity planning. So it's not all of it, but part of it. And finally, setting appropriate timing expectations so that your stakeholders understand how long it takes to complete this work. And finally, let's explore something from the impact column. We all know that research can happen months or years before there's a visible business outcome. But just keeping record of 1 the research that's being conducted for any product and service, and 2, the ways in which it's being leveraged, big or small, over time can help us draw a direct line to the business impact like you see here. So I've shared the framework. We've built it out and we've gone over some examples. But the work doesn't stop here. Once you start tracking project metadata, you have to start socializing it. Start bringing it into conversations that you are already having with leadership and with stakeholders. Include it in your business reviews, talk about it in your stand-ups, and cite it when you're emailing out study reports. And most importantly, don't wait. Don't wait until you have the best tool or system in place. Don't wait until you have a certain number of studies complete or a full set of data for each study to start sharing. This information can't help us break that defensive pattern and change the narrative if we don't share it with others, especially leadership. When we started this process at AWS, it was incredibly messy. It was manual, and we struggled to find metadata for projects older than 6 months. So we ultimately had incomplete data, but we started sharing it anyways. We included it in our monthly business reviews and team documents. We used it to spark conversations during goal planning and to ask for additional resources. The tone of our conversations with leadership changed. We stopped playing defense, and we started to talk about the impact of research and where and how our leadership could better support our customers by supporting us. And even though we don't have all the answers and what we share is not always perfect, our VP has asked us to keep going. Keep collecting this metadata and keep sharing it with him. And so with that, we're still on this journey. And in many ways, we're just at the beginning. But we see metadata as an investment in our current and future selves. And we want to encourage others to try this framework for themselves. So if you want to quiet those skeptics, truly be a voice for your customers, and demonstrate the business value of research, use this framework to start tracking and socializing your project metadata so you can speak the same language as your leadership and watch as the narrative about the value of research begins to shift.